Hi, I'm 90's brother and welcome to 90's Project Part 2.
Hi guys, we're now going to be looking at determinism. Obviously this is part of the free will and determinism unit. So in determinism, obviously we mentioned before that determinists believe everything in the universe, including human actions and everything, is caused by prior actions. Therefore humans do not have free will. So we're now going to be looking at obviously determining factors and then some determinist views. So we'll start with determining factors. There are four determining factors, like what people think make people make actions, well, I should say philosophers or scholars. So there's social conditioning, there's the environment, there's genetics, and psychological issues. So we're going to start with genetics. So in genetics, obviously you know about genes and all these things. So that people who believe that our genes control us. There's nothing we can do. We have no control over our actions. For example, there's the monoamine enzyme that breaks down cells in the brain, kind of something like that. It breaks down chemicals in the brain, and this is said to affect some people's way of thinking. So if it's a genetic factor, there's nothing we can do. For example, if I go out and murder somebody because my father was a murderer, because he had a gene that made him so aggressive, then it's not my fault. It's caused by other things, like this gene. So that's a determining factor. And then there's also the environment. Some people believe that your actions depend on where you are in life. Like I can be in Africa in warm environments, or I can be in a cold environment. So they believe that people in warm places are kind of lazy and everything, and are more prone to crime because of that, relaxed climate. Whereas people in, random climates like here, for example, are less prone to commit crimes because of that, inconsistency with weather. So it's been argued, so if it depends on where you are in the environment, then we're not really at fault here ourselves, but then we can sort of move to other countries to be better people. Like the environment itself will make us better. But you can argue against that, like how surely does the environment really matter? Like if the weather is bad, do I go out stealing? Is that really immoral, like a moral thing? Can I be held morally accountable for that? Can I just say, no, I'm not morally responsible because the weather was bad? You can argue both ways. And then there's social conditioning. Obviously, social conditioning is the belief that people think and act in line with the social beliefs, like social, cultural things, and, all our actions are influenced by society. Here you can apply some Freud, social views and stuff like that. So there's Thomas Sowell who said, social conditioning is the idea that human self is infinitely plastic, allowing humanity to be changed and ultimately perfected. People who believe in social conditioning, they feel that we ourselves can change over time if we are in the right social environment, and therefore in the future we can become perfect. And then there are also psychological issues. So psychological issues, how psychological influences on us, people bribing us psychologically can affect our well-being, our mental health state, and it can also affect our decisions and how we do things. For example, if you look at the Philip Zimbardo experiment, the prison experiment where he went to prison, and all these prisoners started acting according to, their roles. They carried out those roles even though they were good people before, So it shows us that there are psychological issues that affect us mentally. These affect our decisions. For example, if somebody's applying pressure on me, or peer pressure, or, abusing me psychologically, and then I kill that person, then I'm not really morally responsible, because obviously it's their fault because of those psychological issues I was going through. However, you could argue that you shouldn't really blame psychological issues. You can't just say, oh, that person has a psychological issue, therefore they shouldn't be punished, because we have to think about society. We have to think about our society, the place we live in, to make it a safer place. But then, obviously, you can think about people with schizophrenia and all those things. So you can just bring in a number of case studies to support your argument. We're now going to move on to hard determinism. So obviously, I mentioned that hard determinism is a belief that everything in the universe, including all human actions, our choices, everything is due to prior causes. We do not have any free will. So hard determinists firstly believe in the theory of universal causation. So this is all events in principle are predictable. Human desires, everything. You just have to look around the universe for the causal factors. For example, human desires for love, affection, lasting for sex or anything. All those are human desires, and it's a universal cause. There are factors behind those other factors, and there's always a factor behind the other factor. John Locke, I don't know how to pronounce the name anyway, says something like, remember this illustration of a man who is locked up in a room, who thinks he has free will. Well, we think he has free will. He is locked up in a room, but he chooses to stay in bed. In reality, he's locked up in the bedroom, and he can't really get out. That's a cause, a determining factor. In that situation, he doesn't really have free will. You could argue otherwise, like he has a free will to go and try and open the door, but anyway, he's still locked in, so he does not have free will. So, in hard determinism, morality is concerned with what people ought to do, what they ought not to do. If freedom is possessed, then no morality is possessed, because if somebody has freedom, then how can you say you ought not to do that? Because freedom, you should be allowed to do everything you want, and then morality is about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So if somebody has freedom, then really they're not moral. It's either you have freedom or morality, and since they are hard determinists, they believe you do not have free will. That's why. And then an example of a good hard determinist is Clarence Darrow. Remember, he argued in the case of Leopold and Leod, who killed another boy, and he argued that those boys were not really responsible for their actions, because their actions were determined by prior upbringing. How can a person be punished for the upbringing they were brought up? If somebody is encouraging me, saying, okay, you're very intelligent, you're above everybody else, then how can I be punished for believing myself to be that way? It's my social setting that's the problem. It wasn't their fault, and that's what Clarence Darrow argued against. And he managed to bring down the sentence from the death penalty down to life sentence, which is quite good. And then it gives also an example of the differences in morality. For example, a woman who's emotionally distraught, her husband physically abusing her and everything, and then she kills him. She's different from a woman who just chooses to murder her husband for his money, you see. But either way, there's still determining factors behind. We don't have any free will. And then we can also look at B.F. Skinner, and he says human action is likely to be determined. He builds on, you remember Pavlov's dogs, where they're conditioned to start salivating each time they heard a bell ringing. And so he kind of believes in determinism. But you could argue he's a bit of a soft determinist, but yeah, he's a hard determinist to some extent. He believes that, we can condition ourselves from these determining factors. Like, people can be conditioned socially to become better people. We can build on these principles. For example, those dogs who salivated when they heard the bell ringing, if no food came, they'll eventually have to go out and find some food. So, for example, if you say a prisoner who keeps murdering somebody, if there are no people to murder, then you have to change his ways, or something like that. We can be conditioned. And there's also Steven Pinker, who looks at determinism from another angle, a different perspective. He looks at it from a biological angle, from Charles Darwin's perspective of survival of the fittest, and how survival of the fittest, like how we change over time, evolution and all that. So he says, for example, guilt, anger, sympathy, and everything, biological. We've got this moral sense that's innate within us. Our determining factors are innate, These prior causes are innate within our human nature. It's not like the other ones who just keep going for an infinite regression of, determining factors. Our human nature, like emotions, all these things. So that's free will and determinism. You can obviously look at other scholars like Hondrick, who says there's no moral responsibility because our psychoneural mind is just a product. And you can look at other people for how